Xirtus.
Hey, everybody, tune in to Recent Tartarians.
Recent Tartarians. Recent Tartarians.
Join us on another exciting adventure of Xirtus.
So, The Dancing Plague. Also inspired an idea I had for a movie about a decade back. The movies take a long time and a lot of money, and I don't know if I have enough time to make this one, so I might as well just narrate some of my story. So come with me and let's take a quick adventure into the world of Strasbourg and the Dancing Plague, shall we? And also imagine this story could have happened anywhere. It could have been in any town, Beijing or Wuhan. It might as well be in Argentina. Anywhere in the world that you want to be. It could be happening right there in your hometown. But wherever it happened, imagine that that's where you be, and imagine how it would affect you to be there while this event was happening. If here's where the Dancing Plague is happening, be here now, and learn the lesson today so you can bring the lesson with you tomorrow, and avoid the witch hunt, and essentially Satanism, and not be like Dave. Dave is the normal cashier. You want to be like Hal, the smarter cashier, who knows the code for that exotic fruit, who sees things just a little bit deeper, who has all the right symbols to guide through the darkness as reflective symbols of illumination to lead their way. So, The Dancing Plague by Andreas. Annabelle and Anthony are only teenagers. Both are orphaned, neither read nor write, nor speak much for that matter. However, the world around them is changing, and is not hard to notice. Many are sick from the plague and ergotism, which were incurring disease, heart attack, and gangrene, as well as insanity. The elite Holy Empire protect itself by remaining isolated in their castles and churches at the cost of others. The female protagonist Annabelle is orphaned at the opening scene and left to survive on her own. Her mother's body and that of a fat man are taken to the corpse piles to await for a weekly Holy Sunday bonfire. The local landlord, a fat, vulgar older man, begins harassing Annabelle, much to her dismay. She evades him at first, but considers her fears inevitable. Thought dead like his family, young Anthony had been unconscious for nearly a day until finally, in the darkness of the night, a rat bites his foot, finding to his horror himself and swarms of rats drowning in a pool of the dead. Anthony climbs out of the pile and runs into the darkness of the night, into the plague, and into the leprosy district. The Sunday bonfire inevitably comes. Children are playing in the streets, and the mimes are interpreting the stories of the witch, who has cursed the town. The corpses of the old dead mother and the fat man are burnt with the other corpses. The priests pray, and the wife of the fat man sings and cries. The smoke and the heat from the burning of the fire irritate the rats, which have festered all week in the corpses. From the bonfire, the rats flee, the thousands of pests, into the town and streets, until eventually the rats find their way into the grain piles. The wife of the fat man, the widows beginning to sing and dance, find themselves dancing, but begins to sing and dance herself to death, and astonishingly, the entire village begin to follow in suit. The singing and dancing to death continues to grow until it becomes such a frightening phenomenon that the isolated priests from the village sent letters to Rome itself for help. When the landlord attempts to molest Annabelle, finally Annabelle, who defeats the Lord with her bare hands, he falls dead upon her. Annabelle removes the knife from the landlord's chest, and then grabs the loaf of bread from the landlord's table, running out the door with Anthony. Around the bonfire, the townfolk are singing and dancing and twirling with each other. Some are kissing and hugging and stripping. Such passions erupt between men and women and women and man and man, and the singing and dancing becomes like to an orgy. with people literally eating each other, drawing blood with great ecstasy. The songs they sing are like those of the troopers, but cursed by the devil and with psychoactive-induced synthetic rhythms and drumming beats. And then the children watch as Strasbourg, that they are standing outside of just upon a hill, is consumed in a dancing, hysterical fire. This because, just beyond the city gate, the word which had reached the Vatican equated the phenomenon with a legendary curse, and they sent newly trained Jesuit exorcists. The Jesuit priests acquired the training in the Far East and in Africa to exorcise the town of these demons. Yet when the Jesuits saw Strasbourg, they burned the city to the ground. Fleeing all that they knew, Annabelle and Anthony stop in a field along the way to eat some bread that they have brought from the landlord that Annabelle has had to slay. It is made clear from the priests who have acquired some of the tainted bread from the grains pile that have been infected by ergot that the bread itself has become infected. This information makes itself clear to Annabelle and Anthony in a different way, throwing themselves in their psychedelic wrecked stupors into the fields of grass, which, under the ergot poisoning, the blades of grass feel like blades of knives. This is the first time that they realize, through isolation, the cause of the hysteria that is being caused by the ergot poisoning from the bread, and they experience intense auditory and visual hallucinations as a group of flagellants cross the field. And there's more to that story, but that's the gist of it, and I hope that you get enough out of it that you can make up your own bits. And who knows, maybe someday that'll be a movie, but for now it's just a folklore tale of Xirtus. And you never know where you might hear a folklore tale from Xirtus, because Xirtus happens in the darndest ways, in the darndest places, and in a way we're all part of the Xirtus together. And an interesting song from a psychedelic Greek 60s band that you might not have heard of, but maybe you have, is Aphrodite's Child's Four Horsemen. Which, if you remember recently, I said that the Four Horsemen reminded me rather of Disney's new Three Caballeros and Xandra show, a pretty amazing esoteric little Disney show that I saw and apparently no one else had besides 4 people in the Philippines, because the show had secretly been silently circulating for years outside of the United States, only on iTunes Philippines. Why exactly that is, your guess is as good as mine. But the funny thing, watching the few channels that seemed to talk about DuckTales at all, was that most people had just not even seen the show, not because they couldn't, but because they felt like Disney didn't want them to, which being told not to see something is just oh so adorable. But yeah, I'm bringing it up again because I stress the fact that there really are some interesting things in this show that you probably should check out if you're interested in alternative history, Axis Mundi, and Titanology. But I've already done 3 hours on Disney DuckTales and I don't think I want to go into that right now. So back to the psychedelic and esoteric in the 60s, Aphrodite's Child with their catch 18 of an album, 666, what an interesting name for a vinyl. And upon the vinyl rings of Saturn's spin at 45 RPM, a number of Aphrodite's Child's best. And you do have to wonder which of Aphrodite's children, because there were a few. In fact, Aphrodite had several lovers: Ares, Hermes, Poseidon, and Anchises. All but the last had several. Aphrodite had like 16 children, which illustrates the point from Revelation that when the Lamb opened the first seal, and I saw the first horse, the horseman held a bow. And then when the Lamb opened the second seal, I saw the second horse, and the second horseman held a sword. The leading horse is white, the second horse is red, the third horse is black, the last one is green. And when the Lamb opened the third seal, I saw the third horse, and the horseman had a balance. Now when the Lamb opened the fourth seal, I saw the fourth horse, and the horseman was the past. Revelation's pretty weird, right? I mean, like, how many of you even seen a green horse, except for in The Wizard of Oz? Then again, if you see a green horse and you've already seen a white, red, and a black one, then that's the last horse, and that means it's probably time to get out of Dodge. So yeah, back to my story about how I was leaving Connecticut, because right by the Palace Theater was this explosion that happened on Main Street that took about 3 days. However, one of the biggest fires that happened, according to all accounts, happened in my new destination of Minneapolis, but only found out about that after the recent fire that happened in Connecticut. A fire which, never fully explained to us, was perhaps the result of saline solution which had crept into the basement floor underneath the tunnels. This saline solution would have found its way around the electrical system. Some 15,000 volts of electricity coming from the local electric train system. That 100-year-old line, though perhaps been refurbished over the last few decades, corroded away and consumed perhaps even by the rodents living in the city's underground below the brick buildings of New York and Norwalk. When that arc from the exposed copper wiring combined with the saline solution made contact, the explosion was large enough to shake the very windows of the buildings across the street from the Palace Theater and the Palace Theater itself, causing the building to shake as the entire street was consumed in a giant cloud of smoke. And the resonant brick wall shook like a wave of water. This explosion, this historic 3-day explosion that lasted, according to all accounts, where our entire Palace Theater was stalked out by surveillance for 3 days, day and night, until eventually the building was patched up and the underground was sealed away. And it was around that morning, before dawn on that third morning, that I snuck away into the night reading about the California University students stuck in China amid the coronavirus, which was outbreaking. And to think this spot where this photo was taken, was literally the exact location of this explosion, which destroyed several cars and the entire fried chicken restaurant across the street. And yet somehow that beautiful brick building that's lasted several hundred years continues to last even to this day. And considering with all the other things that went down, I'm not even surprised that this barely made news. It did teach me a lot about fires, particularly in these old brick buildings, and one of the reasons why they don't last so long. Some of the reasons why they do, and how hard it really is to take them down, and how much of a beating they're really willing to take. I'll have to admit, there's very few places that impress me as much as that old brick palace theater, and it's a testament to that Tartarian architecture that while the world around it moves, it still stands there to this day. But one of the buildings not so lucky, my next destination, Minneapolis, Minnesota, where Bisquick and Pillsbury and Gold Medal Flour, all that the wheat belt has to offer across the Midwest, are forever immortalized by these steampunk stone castles with giant moving stone wheat mill wheels and the world's first fully functional hydroelectric system, completed gridded electric streetcars. Minneapolis, once Minnehaha, an Atlantis-sized spherical island in the middle of the river, a spiritual settlement for the native peoples, entirely unrecognizable from that original past. Yet despite all the modernization, there in the center still stands to this day the wreckage of the explosion that happened due to the peculiar circumstances of wheat milling and the potential consequences of static electricity and gluten in this incredible ice-covered metropolitan, where aquifers and aqueducts run in through and underneath the Skyline indoor city-wide tunnel system, and indeed the tunnels under Minneapolis itself. Tunnels discovered and explored, and some even collapsed in as early as 1869, a year by which there was already a large booming population and several wheat explosions already. This is something that's actually pretty exciting about wheat. I don't think that many people think stone wheat crackers are that exciting, but crackers are far more fascinating than I think anyone is willing to give them credit. You see what I did there. Crackers require these giant stone wheat mills that is produced from the spinning wheat mills that, in conjunction with the correct amount of pressure, is so great if these machines are not well regulated and clearly maintained, so as sweepers constantly coming in and out and maintaining these machines and the floors, so as the great amount of starched flour powder does not accumulate on the machines, building up a sort of floury cake-like material, then it is almost inevitable that that static electricity will cause the starch to explode, and the explosion will be far greater than you would expect from the likes of the Pillsbury Doughboy, far more in likeness of something like Tyler Durden or Breaking Bad might produce. Yet another metaphor from South Park. And so another fascinating thing to learn about flour, that gluten explodes. Another truth discovered from South Park. And all of a sudden, the wheat belt, far more interesting and influential during this period of biological, chemical, and industrial warfare. A time when, due to the ice again, the cooling and extraction of glycerin into liquid nitrogen made it possible for Nobel to invent dynamite, a composition of that TNT 2,4,6 trinitrotoluene, which stored in sawdust and flour could make quite an impressive firecracker. So impressive that Minneapolis, it seems, even from the 1900s, has never entirely recovered, which is actually awesome because Minneapolis, although beautiful, must maintain its historic precedent. And looking into the renderings of some of the antique architecture of Minneapolis, where locomotives cross the aqueduct upon the railed stone bridges, directly through the mills themselves, automating with great rapidity the American and international economy, it just sort of blows your mind about how impressive the 1800s were in the Midwest, and these demonstration machines operate functionally today, making it clear that the same product can still be made the same way. The only difference being that today you might add a few computers to it because it is 2020. But how insanely functional and innovative are these machines, particularly compared to the men that seem to be able to operate them? These insanely innovative steam machines offer the power of more than 1,000 horses or men, in fact, legions of them. Yet, considering that entire 6-story buildings were exploding, buildings made of 2-ton stones, there's a fascinating conflict between the primal nature of these individuals and the sophistication of the machinery which define the time. And the time is dynamic from 240 million years ago until just about the last century. The explanation from a prehistorical Atlantis-like Pocahontas culture, where the waterfalls surrounded Minnehaha, to the period where the photos are taken, sometime after the first devastation, giant stones being available depicted in this photograph here, already dismantled from St. Anthony Falls, named after the plague of St. Anthony and St. Anthony's fire. Wouldn't you know it, St. Paul, the new name for St. Anthony, still knows the waterfall as St. Anthony's Falls. However, at the end of the last ice age, the waterfall was apparently 200 feet high and almost a mile wide. Today, there's frankly barely anything of that left. Even several hundred years ago, due to hydroelectric damming and manifest destiny, the water power plant, in conjunction with the money of the Winslow House Hotel, steadied the stream of Minnehaha, bringing all sorts of modern conveniences, from the antiquitech of Moorish, Spanish, Arabic lighting from the 11th century, to the downright steampunk electric streetcars, making the residential suburbs possible by 1894. This just a taste of the industrial plans of Minneapolis. A mini-apple which put the Big Apple, in many respects, to shame. Beyond the hydroelectric was the instantaneous communication from electric lines of telegraphs and pantelegrams. The pantelegraph, seemingly steampunk fax machine of the 1800s, which made it possible to send full-on rendered illustrations from not just one city to another, but from one nation and continent to another, so as someone from the Alamo could share news the same moment, not only the same day, on electrical lines crossing the continent and the seas, and indeed the world, so as that beyond conversations, full-on illustrations could be shared from New York to Old London to St. Petersburg, across the Trans-Siberian Expressway into Alaska, and back to California. The difference between the momentary adventure of electricity and the voyage of mail parcels across the sea galvanized the world into two separate, coherent, disagreeing experiences. And it's not hard to see how surfing, though a touted by tourism Polynesian invention, albeit one with a clearly disproportionate number of Scandinavian lumberjack descendant surfing experts, it's not hard at all to see how modern California surfing gets at least as much influence, if not tremendously more, from the lumberjacks of the Midwest as opposed to from Hawaii. The tourism trading post, controlled by the American Post Office and blackmailed into statehood. You see, back in 1822, the U.S. government sawmill produced over 300 to 400 feet of lumber a day in Minneapolis. This lumber was put onto lumber chutes and sawmills, as depicted in this photograph from 1865. These roller coaster and log ride-like lumber chutes traversed the Midwest and indeed the entire continent, carrying lumber for hundreds of miles, and in conjunction with the ore mining of Colorado and the Sierra Rocky Mountains, Minnesota Wood Products can pack 2,400 freight cars, build 29 towns out of 1,000 people, all by the mid-1850s. Eventually, by spring, melted snow would fill the Minnesota streams, and crews of men would float across these rivers, shoving piles of logs into the water. They then would walk and float downstream across these logs, sorting the logs and keeping the logs moving. Moving the logs downriver was a tricky business, but any sane man will tell you, danger is better than having a boss. So these river drifters, men responsible for getting the logs to the sawmills, had to work fast while the water was high, but not so fast that they lost control and jammed up their logs. It is no secret that these were the grandfathers of the loggers from the West Coast and the fathers of the first surfers in Santa Cruz, California. Never mind what you heard about those 3 Polynesian princes, unless you remember the part where they commissioned to have their boards made by lumberjacks in California, in Santa Cruz, out of redwood. Because, you know, that part, that's the true part. But the most important thing, lumberjacks, that's where surfing comes from. Make sure you don't forget. So with this new look at the Midwest, I hope you see how the heartland is really the heart chakra of this whole yoga experience that is GI America. And it definitely wasn't my worst airplane experience. I mean, not like last time where I had to stay in the airport for 5 days so I could get new tickets. I mean, right? Like, who has to stay in the airport for 5 days? Everything about that just seems... But then again, life hasn't been the same for me for quite some time, ever since I've been out of my element and started doing this whole YouTube channel in the first place, getting all sorts of interesting packages in the mail from all sorts of people around the world, wondering what's true. A lot of my perspectives have changed based on the information that I've been sharing with you and all the information that we've been able to bring to the surface and put out there for people. I don't completely understand and that I want to look into more. And I'm wondering all the time what it is that I'm seeing, and I want to see it more and check it out more because that's the only thing that makes any sense is figuring out what's really going on. That's my opinion. That's one of the fruitless endeavors of existentialism, and I found myself surrounded in experts in experience. That anything that searches for je ne sais quoi can be referred to as Tartarian, and oh so Tartarian, oh so very Tartartastic, beyond the expialidociousness and the supercalifragilisticity. There is Tartaria, as I believe I was not born to live a human life, but to be the stuff of future memory. That is to say, I would like to believe that there is something more to it than just that you had a good meal, or learned humility from suffering, and that maybe learning the hard way is some sort of evolutionary gift to give back, so that the 100th monkey might learn it easier. And even after all this time, there's still so many questions, and the simplest question is still the hardest to answer. What is Tartaria? Why is Tartaria? Is Tartaria even at all? So many people are asking this question finally, and thank God, people should know, people should wonder. But the answer to the question, what is Tartaria? It's as simple as answering, know thyself. And through knowing thyself, you might find out more about society and the true inner nature of being.
This
program is coming to you via Relay 2 satellite, a spacecraft orbiting the Earth at a speed of over 17,000 miles per hour.
Recent Tartarian.